If you're preparing for the MSRA SJT, have a look at this example SJT question. Okay, time's up. Please write down your order into the chat. Okay. So write down, while you're doing that, I'll just do a quick read through. And while you're reading through in the exam, try to picture the scene. With the SJTs, you don't have time to come back to any questions. You want to finish the last question just a few seconds before the buzzer sounds, right? Because if you come back to one of these, you end up having to read the whole thing again. So it just wastes a lot of time, right? So just picture the scene. You're finishing a busy night shift and you're exhausted. The morning doctor's called in sick. And as you're about to leave, the senior nurse says, look, there's a message from medical staffing. Would you stay on until the early afternoon when a locum will be available? Now, this last bit's really important. You know, there's being tired, then there's being exhausted, then there's being so exhausted that you're barely able to keep your eyes open and you're unable to concentrate. Let me ask you a question before we look at the actual scenario. Is the doctor in this situation safe to be seeing patients, to be on the ward, to be making decisions, to be writing drugs, to be clerking? No. To be doing procedures, potentially. Okay. No. Okay, good. And then if we look at the options, let's look at the preferred response. And let me just have a quick look at what people have put down. So some people have put D first, some people have put A first. And then those that have started with D, some have got DA, some have got DE, and then a variety of choices for where they put B and C and so on. Okay, so there's a big range of different answers, right? Just out of interest, let me do something. I'm just going to launch a poll. Just put which letter did you put first in the poll? That's all. I only want you to put, so out of A, B, C, D, E, which one did you put at number 1? That's the only thing I'm looking at. Okay, so very interesting. So that's enough to get an idea. More than half of you put D first, about a third of you put A first, and most of the rest put E first. Okay, so there's even just between what you put number 1, there's a big spread. Okay, the preferred response is D, A, E, B, C. Okay, D, A, E, B, C. Now I'm going to come back to this and explain why, but first let me explain how it's marked. Section 1 is marked in a really complex way. It needs to be marked by a computer. It's called keyed responses marking. So where there are 5 options, like this one, there's 20 marks maximum per question. Only D, A, E, B, C, this is the only order that will give you 20. Okay, but it's not as simple as you get 4 marks for each bit that you get. Because let's say you had 3 right and 2 wrong. How many marks would you think you'd get out of 20? You might think, oh, 3 right and 2 wrong. I should get 60% of the marks? The answer is it depends. Depends which ones you've got right and which ones you've got wrong and where you've put them specifically. You could get 18 out of 20. You could get 16. You could get 14. You could get less. Okay. Every possible order has a number of marks keyed to it. So, for example, D, A, E, B, C has a number of marks put to it. If you had A and D the wrong way round, i.e., they're both near the top, but you just had them the wrong way round, but everything else was in the right place. Overall, that's really quite sensible. You'd actually get 90% of the marks for them. Whereas, can you see, if you had D at the bottom and C at the top, even though you've got 3 right and 2 wrong, you would get very few marks for that because overall it suggests poor judgment. It shows negatives. All right. So every single combination has a number of marks keyed to it. Okay. That's why it's called keyed response marking. Even if you don't get it right, as long as you have put everything into A rank, the lowest you're going to get is 8 out of 20. The most you're going to get is 18. If it's wrong, if it's right, you get 20. So only one option will ever be the best answer. But there's lots of ways that you can get most of the marks. Let me show you how you'd actually do it. And when we were trying to recreate what the real exam looks like for this, there isn't any commercial quiz software that can mark section 1 correctly. So we had to invent it. We actually hired a coder. We explained exactly how it is. And then we had to work with them until we made it work. Okay. So look, here's an example. Here's an example with 4, because some will have 4, some will have 5. The scenario will be there. You'll have 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let me show you an example with 5. Okay. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You'll have your options A, B, C, D here, and you will, in the exam, you will drag them. So if you think this is first, you'll drag this here. If you think this is second, you'll drag this here. If you think this is third, you'll drag this here, and so on. Okay. And then it'll be marked. Okay, so that's got 12 out of 20. Whereas if I had a different order, I could mark that and it might give me 14 or 16 or 18. Okay. Now, if I go back to the poll, as I mentioned, there was a 3-way split between A, D, and E. Those of you that had A first, that was actually a big number. A third of you had A first. Why did you put A number 1 rather than D? Just type into the chat. And then I'll explain the order so that we understand why this is the best response. And then we'll move on to a section 2 question. So just type into the chat. Anybody that put A number 1, why did you put A number 1? Okay, great. So a few people have said something along the lines of that, it's going to take time to do this. That's why they thought so. Let me try and summarize some of the different things. Because other people have said, this is dealing with it directly because they're the ones that asked you to do this. So let me know in the chat how many of you put A number 1 and D number 2, because in your mind you were thinking, this is the order in time I would do this. Like they've asked me a question, let me just contact them and say, look, I'm not going to do it. So they know they can start looking for someone else. Okay. And then I'll contact my consultant. Maybe they're not free. When they are free, I'll discuss it discussing the whole situation, explaining everything and why it's not safe. And they've asked me and I'm tired and I'm exhausted. And that's all going to take time. Is there anyone that's why you put A1 and D2, that you were thinking, I'd do this first and then I would do this next? You were thinking about a sequence in time. Yes, lots of people are saying that's exactly what they're doing. See, this is the most common reason to lose marks in section 1 of the SJT, is if you're thinking, I would do this and then I would do this as a sequence of time, you're approaching in completely the wrong way. And in a lot of questions, it would lead to you losing marks and then wondering, I don't understand why. What I'm suggesting is sensible. You have to look at all of these as discrete options, i.e. the key word is or, not then. Look, what they're asking you to do is, if you could only do one of these, and this is your whole response, and you're not going to do anything else, which is the best response? Is it this, or this, or this, or this, or this? It's not that I'm going to do all of these, and this is the order I'm going to do them. I'll do this first, and then I do this, and then that's not what they're asking you to do at all. If you think about it like that, unfortunately, in a lot of questions, you're going to lose marks. Okay? So the key word is or. Each of these is a separate option, and you have to imagine that is all you're doing, and that is your full response to the scenario, which is the best one. So that's why, okay, bear in mind that scenario, okay? Why is D the best response? Because can you see that in D, not only are you not doing it, you are recognizing that, look, medical staffing know that if you've worked a night shift, that they shouldn't be asking you in the first place to keep working. Why not? What's the problem with continuing to work? Let's say you weren't even so exhausted that you can't concentrate. So like, this is clearly unsafe. But even if you weren't, why shouldn't you keep working for several hours, look, until the early afternoon? And it's the morning now. Handover might be 8, 9 o'clock. Early afternoon might be 2, 3. Why should you not keep working 4 or 5 hours after you've just done a night shift? Because you're going to work more than you're legally allowed to work. There's increased risk of errors. Okay. There's reasons why there's legal protections, right? Fatigue can lead, and there's evidence on this. There's a study that showed that a doctor who hadn't had enough sleep, the sort of change in decision making was similar to someone who was drunk at a couple of times over the legal limit to drive. Okay. So it would be unsafe, right? So you see, look, indeed, if you're discussing the whole situation, look, I'm exhausted, it's not safe, but they're asking me to do this. What this shows is, this shows positives for not just that you know your limits, but you recognize that one of your roles is that if you see something happening that could put patients and staff at risk, you might not be able to directly change this. Like, you can say to them, no, they shouldn't ask you in the first place. But now your consultant, if they know about that, they could contact medical staffing and say, you shouldn't ask the residents, you shouldn't ask the doctors to stay on beyond the legal hours. This not only shows that you know your limits, you recognize it's important to be safe, but beyond that, you're raising concerns with someone senior, which is one of the subdomains, actually, okay, in knowing your limits. And so hopefully you're preventing it happening in future. But can you see, it also means who's ultimately responsible for the patients on the ward? The consultant. They know, if you told them the whole situation, then they know that the morning on call hasn't come in. They found a locum for the afternoon. I'm too tired to do now. Now they can say, okay, I'll get the registrar to cover the on call until they come. I'll hold down the fort in the clinic. You go and sleep. Okay. So this is like, if this is all you're going to do, this is the most complete answer, right? Then you've got A, right? If you say, look, I'm not going to do it, again, you're recognizing your limits, right? Whereas sometimes what people do is, if you don't look at and understand that you're comparing, it's not about good and bad. Sometimes they'll all be bad. Sometimes they'll all be good. You're comparing, is this better or worse than this? It's worse than this because while in both of these, you're not doing it, so you're not putting yourself in an unsafe situation and patients in an unsafe situation. This one, you're also raising concerns with someone senior, which you're not doing in this one, because that's your whole answer, right? Whereas, can you see, all of these ones shows you don't know your limits and they introduce risk. Okay, now this is a tough question. Now, in a particularly tough question, because generally I recommend you start at the top and you work your way down. But if you're finding it particularly tough, if you work out the top two, then work out the worst two, the middle will find itself. So let's do that, okay? If you look at B and C, in both B and C, you'd get a negative for knowing your limits, which is one of the subdomains of coping with pressure, is knowing your limits, okay? Because can you see, in both of these, you can't concentrate, you're exhausted, can't even keep your eyes open, yet you're staying on and covering the on-call. And so you're putting yourself, your patients, and your colleagues at risk. So why is, both of these are awful. Why is B not quite as awful as C? That's the question. You see, in both of these, you're being really unsafe. You're not recognizing your limits. The difference is in B, your motivation is not for yourself. You know, you're not recognizing your limits, but your motivation isn't to try to make personal gain. If you look at C, what you're saying is, look, I'll do a few hours, but I want you to give me a full day back. You're trying to take advantage. Now, what does the GMC say about this? That, look, let's say they asked you, could you do, like, we need cover on this day where someone else was supposed to do on call, but they've gone on a course and it's in 2 weeks' time and it's the weekend. It's perfectly reasonable for you to say, I'd like either, you know, extra time off, or I'd like a locum rate because it's planned. But actually, GMC guidance says that in an emergency situation, if you are helping your colleagues, you shouldn't try to make personal gain. You shouldn't try to take advantage. See, in C, you're trying to take advantage of the situation. And it's a good example of the difference between what might happen in real life And what the exam is asking you to pick, according to the guidance, where relevant, what's the optimum situation. Because in real life, you're tired, you don't want to do it. You know what, you might ask for locum rate, but in an emergency, you shouldn't try to take advantage. Look, I'm going to do a few hours, but I want you to give me 8 hours back. You're trying to take advantage. Okay, that's why C is worse than B. They're both awful though, because both of them show that you don't know your limits. Now that brings me to E, because a lot of you might thought E is great. Some of you put it first. What's the risk with E that is really subtle? This is why you have to read it carefully. You might miss this if you're not paying attention. Look, I'm too tired to work now. I'll come back in the early evening before my night shift to help out. Well, look, in the early evening, they don't need you. There's going to be a locum in the early afternoon, so they'll already have cover. On top of that, what happens if you come in a few hours early in the early evening before your night shift? What happens? What's the risk? Well done. The risk is that towards the end of your night shift, you are now overtired. You've worked more than you're legally allowed to. Your concentration is likely to wane, and you might put patients at risk at that end. It's not as bad as this because who knows, that night shift might not be as busy. You know, right now, you can't even keep your eyes open. You're that exhausted. So here, there's definite risk. Here, there's potential risk. Okay. That's why this isn't as good as these where you recognize your limits. You're still not recognizing your limits here. Just here, it's worse. So do you see, it's about better or worse, not about good and bad in section 1. All right. And it's or. If this is my whole answer, this is the best response. Is it this or this? Not I do this and then this. It's not a sequence of time. That's really, really important to understand. Okay. You're comparing it to the one above and the one below. Now, if you found that helpful, there's more examples in our MSRA Masterclass webinar recording. You can access it for free. It's over 75 minutes. It's on our YouTube channel. I'll pop the link down below.